The Wind Waker is a game defined by its appearance. To me, saying that seems like a tired cliche, but it really is true. This is a game that was shaped top to bottom by its looks. Before I really started looking into the development of this game for this season, I had envisioned trying to zag where other write-ups on the Wind Waker zigged, and to make the visuals only a passing mention. But after delving into the development story, it's clear the Wind Waker and its development can in no way be separated from its controversial visual design. This is Legendary Adventures, a Legend of Zelda playthrough podcast. This week we're taking a look at the development history of the 10th mainline game in the series, The Wind Waker. Development on The Wind Waker started in 2000 following the completion of Majora's Mask. It was directed by Eiji Aonuma. He is one of 5 directors on Ocarina of Time and was described as the supervising director for Majora's Mask, which was co-directed by Yoshiaki Koizumi. In a 2003 interview with Computer and Video Games magazine, Aonuma described how he was made director of the Wind Waker project. He said, "We decided to release the GameCube and make a Zelda game for it. I didn't think I was going to be responsible for it, but one day I walked into Mr. Miyamoto's office and said, 'Okay, what am I going to work on next?' And Miyamoto-san said, 'You're not working on Zelda yet?' Aonuma laughed. Unlike Majora's Mask, the next Zelda title would not be built using the engine and assets of Ocarina of Time. That's because Nintendo was preparing for the release of its next home console, the GameCube. Nintendo reps gave the gaming press a first look at the GameCube and its capabilities in 2000 at the Nintendo-run Space World. Write-ups can be found in a variety of gaming magazines and websites. The Electronic Gaming Monthly write-up is particularly detailed. It showed off what the GameCube looked like, showcased the prototype of the controller, and a variety of planned features. Readers of EGM even got a full, detailed breakdown of the GameCube's specs. Also on display were a number of demos created by Nintendo with the intent to show what the GameCube was capable of in terms of graphics and gameplay. According to EGM, only 2 demos were performed live. One with Shigeru Miyamoto showing off the GameCube controller. Another was known as Super Mario 128. The demo started by showing a pixel art rendition of Mario. It was then converted into a 3D object, made of 3D cubes sitting atop a circular game board. The camera zoomed in on a model of Mario which began picking up and tossing blocks away, revealing more Marios. After being revealed, the other Marios also began picking up and tossing blocks, until 128 Marios were on screen at one time. The demo was also a showcase of physics simulations. The circular game board changed shape and spun and sprouted mountain-like peaks and valleys. It moved and shaked. All of the remaining demos were pre-rendered videos generated on a GameCube. They included videos showcasing characters from Pokémon, Luigi's Mansion, Metroid, and The Legend of Zelda. The Zelda demo was brief. A version posted online by IGN is around 14 seconds long. I found a few versions on YouTube that come in around 25 seconds. In the demo, an adult Link and Ganon, clearly modeled off their appearance in Ocarina of Time, are locked in battle. They clash swords, and Link performs a spin attack before they separate. Ganon beckons Link, drawing him back into the fight. Link tosses his shield aside, and the demo ends as the swords of the 2 fighters meet. Electronic Gaming Monthly noted in its write-up, "All the demonstration videos were referred to only as demos and not confirmed titles." That did not stop rapid speculation that each demo represented a game currently in development. IGN wrote an entire article detailing just the Zelda demo. Within that article, the writer states the demo can only be considered the unofficial sequel in the Legend of Zelda franchise. It's clear that the IGN staff were absolutely over the top about the demo, writing, "Whoa, absolutely everything we could have hoped for in a GameCube Zelda title. And the best part is we heard the entire presentation was literally thrown together by Miyamoto and teams at the last minute. Nintendo loyalists should know this. It's a whole lot prettier than anything you've seen, and it's a whole lot darker than any Zelda game you've ever witnessed." As soon as the spectacular began to play, Space World attendees were cheering, and for very good reason. Nintendo Power called the Zelda demo one of the most impressive demos on GameCube, writing the animation and effects were stunning. Write-ups such as these only fueled online speculation and fan excitement about what the GameCube's Legend of Zelda title would hold. But here's the thing. The Space World demo was never meant to be the next Zelda title. In fact, the Zelda team more or less hated it. Let's talk a little bit more about that demo. I've seen several sources state the development of The Wind Waker began prior to the completion of Majora's Mask. My impression after reading through several sources and interviews is that this does not seem to be the case. I believe the confusion comes from a 2002 interview with Eiji Aonuma and Shigeru Miyamoto. During the interview, Miyamoto was asked how long the development process for The Wind Waker was. He said, "If you were actually to go back and look at when we were doing experiments on the GameCube hardware itself, it would be more than 2.5 years. The reason we were able to show you the more realistic looking Zelda battle at Space World 2000 in the summer was because we had been doing some preliminary experiments with the console prior to completing Majora's Mask. That's why that video existed." So, experiments with the GameCube started prior to the completion of Majora's Mask. But Miyamoto immediately clarified development on The Wind Waker did not actually begin with those experiments. He said, "It wasn't until afterwards that we had really done work with the director and the programmers to go ahead and create The Wind Waker." The Space World demo was created by Yoshiki Haruhana and Satoru Takizawa, character designers and illustrators who joined the Zelda team with Ocarina of Time. They confirmed their role in creating the demo in an interview published in the book The Legend of Zelda Art and Artifacts. I've seen it stated before that the demo was the work of Yoshiaki Koizumi, but I believe this is just a misinterpretation by fans. Koizumi stated in an Iwata Asks interview for Super Mario Galaxy he directed the Mario 128 demo. Let's get back to the developers' lack of enthusiasm for the Zelda Space World demo. In a 2013 interview with IGN, Eiji Aonuma said, "I saw that movie and I thought, no, this isn't Zelda. This isn't Zelda at all. I felt like this wasn't what I imagined Zelda to be. It wasn't the Zelda I wanted to make. That video clip didn't contain any big surprises. There wasn't any kind of revelation going on. It was just more of a continuation of the previous version." Haruhana and Takizawa agreed. In the interview within Art and Artifacts, Haruhana said, "As we created that footage, we came to the realization that the realistic route wasn't the way to go." He continued, "At that time, when I was flipping through a game mag, all I saw were really similar looking games, and I began to worry that we would be making one of them. So we thought about what we needed to do with our art to make it stand out. How could we make the readers of that magazine stop and look at our project? We decided that making a realistic Ganondorf and Link wasn't it." In a 2013 Iwata Asks interview, Aonuma further explained the unease that the team experienced with the idea of continuing in a style reminiscent of Ocarina of Time. He said, "It was difficult for us to imagine ourselves easily coming up with new ideas and expanding on the world if we had chosen that path. Of course, while the game is more than its visuals, it was going to be made mostly by the same people, and the ideas we had within the same team has its limits." It was Haruhana who came up with the first drawing that would spark the new ideas for this next Legend of Zelda project. In the Art and Artifacts interview, he said, "We cleared our heads of everything and thought about all the other games in the series. Toon Link came out of that process." He drew a simplified image of Link. He had a large head compared to his body and large eyes. That drawing of Link sparked inspiration among the team members. In the Art and Artifacts interview, Takizawa said, "When I saw Haruhana-san's sketch, I felt possibilities begin to stir within myself. All of these images and ideas began to well up inside of me. If Link looks like this, then the enemies would look like this. And we went from there." Takizawa used that inspiration to draw a classic Zelda enemy in the same style, the Moblin. Aonuma said once those two initial drawings were done, inspiration began to flow. He said, "We began thinking about how we could have them fight, and suddenly it got interesting, with ideas coming out at incredible speed, and I thought, this'll work." In the 2013 Iwata Asks interview, Takizawa described the drawing of Link as coming out of the blue, but it seemed the look of the hero was directly inspired by anime produced by Toei Animation Studios in Japan. In a 2013 interview with 4Gamer, Aonuma noted Haruhana loved the Toei style. He added, "I wanted something that reproduced that style of animation." At the time of the game's release, however, the Zelda team was hesitant to name specific inspiration for the Wind Waker's appearance, and few have been named since, but some have surfaced. One of the major inspirations was never directly confirmed, but based on the appearance alone, it seems likely. That's the anime Little Prince and Eight-Headed Dragon. That movie was released in 1963, and when looking at the protagonist, Susanoo, and comparing it to Link of the Wind Waker, it appears there is a clear line of inspiration. Former Nintendo artist and former Toei animator Yoichi Kodabe thought as much anyway. He was one of the animators who worked on Little Prince and Eight-Headed Dragon. He told the French newspaper Le Monde in 2018, "I strongly suspect the Wind Waker team saw that movie." But he also admitted that he was not involved in the development of the Wind Waker. So while the inspiration seems likely, again, it hasn't been confirmed. I watched the movie for the first time while prepping for this episode just to see if I could find any other inspirations that could be gleaned from it. After watching it, I really don't think so. The movie is really very different in tone and in structure to the Wind Waker. And while the character design seems to have been an inspiration for the appearance of the Wind Waker's characters, I didn't really feel that other elements from the movie carried forward in any way to the Wind Waker. But there are other works which may have been directly sourced as inspiration for the Zelda team when making the Wind Waker. Particularly, the worlds of anime master Hayao Miyazaki. Both Eiji Aonuma and Zelda co-creator Shigeru Miyamoto sourced him as an inspiration. Likewise, Aonuma name-dropped an anime written by Miyazaki and produced by Toei Animation, Animal Treasure Island. Speaking to 4Gamer in 2013, Aonuma said, "I love the worlds drawn by Hayao Miyazaki. They excite me in a way that memories of the film Animal Treasure Island do. Those images really bring me back to life. Bearing that in mind, The Wind Waker captures the essence of an exciting adventure." I also watched Animal Treasure Island, and I can say that while it and The Wind Waker are clearly separate works, I felt there was a more clear line of inspiration between the two. Animal Treasure Island is a loose adaptation of the classic Robert Louis Stevenson novel. There are several images that caught my eye seeming to directly inspire The Wind Waker, including a small boat piloted by protagonist Jim, with a small cannon which he produces from it to engage in ship-to-ship combat. There are also cannons which spring from the walls of the pirate stronghold, which reminded me of the wall-mounted cannons in The Wind Waker. There are also tall, pointed peaks on the titular Treasure Island, which recalled several islands from the Zelda game. Not to mention they're both seafaring adventures involving pirates, treasure maps, and plenty of sneaking around. To bring this anime-inspired look to life, the Zelda team decided to use a technique known as cell shading or toon shading. Cell shading is a rendering technique that gives 3D models a two-dimensional look. Speaking to MTV in 2013, Aonuma said, "At the time when the GameCube came out, within the computer graphics world, within the industry, toon shading was kind of a buzzword. There was a lot of chatter about it, but no one had really explored it in games yet at the time. The staff that I worked with was curious, so we challenged it. We tried it. We said, why don't we try it on a game and see if it works? Maybe we can move forward." The Wind Waker was not the first cel-shaded game. There are a few cel-shaded video games that beat it to the market, including Sega's Jet Set Radio, but it is among the earliest games to utilize the technique. In Season 7 of this podcast, I noted how Nintendo is known for developing the gameplay before the story. And that was the case with The Wind Waker as well. The team began forming the gameplay based entirely around Link and the Moblins. In an interview contained within the Japanese-only Zelda Box guidebook, translated by Glitterberry's Game Translations, Aonuma said, "In early development, the field had nothing but Link and two Moblins. As we concentrated on the details related to the Moblins' problem areas, the number of other characters gradually increased, and the world of the Wind Waker began to take shape. The ability to pick up and wield weapons that were dropped by enemies came from a discussion about how it would be fun if Link were able to use the Moblins' weapons. The ability was then applied to other enemies as well." Miyamoto was a producer on the Wind Waker project, but his involvement was minimal. In Season 6, I included a quote from Miyamoto about how his influence on the series was decreasing. In a December 2002 interview with IGN, Miyamoto said of Aonuma, "On Majora's Mask, he was pretty much independent in moving that project along. so it's been very easy for me as a producer. Likewise, Miyamoto seems to have been hands-off with the development of the Wind Waker, perhaps even more so. My impression from interviews is that he had little input on the project. Shmupulations translated a 2001 published conversation with Miyamoto and Sonic the Hedgehog co-creator Yuji Naka. In it, Miyamoto said, "Zelda and Mario are now being made in a way where I'm not directly involved." Likewise, in a 2003 Nintendo Dream interview translated and published on Good Blood Games, Aonuma said, Miyamoto wasn't involved in putting the specs together. Now that's not to say that Miyamoto had no input on the Wind Waker. We'll see that he did influence the final design in a few areas. And as a producer, Miyamoto would have final say, and he's noted for upturning the tea table and sending projects in new directions. Because of this, Aonuma admitted to hiding the radically new art style from him at first. In a 2013 interview with MTV, Aonuma said, "Because this direction was so different, we knew that Mr. Miyamoto wouldn't approve it as it. So I worked with my team to at least get it to a point where a battle sequence between Link and a Moblin would actually work in this world. And then that was the first time we brought it to Mr. Miyamoto. That was the only time we felt comfortable bringing it to Mr. Miyamoto." He continued, "It's not as though we were consciously keeping it a secret. But when Mr. Miyamoto would say, 'Hey, you got anything to show me?' I would kind of push him off and buy as much time as I could. But at the same time, I think Mr. Miyamoto understood that we were working on creating something and just weren't ready to show him yet." When Aonuma finally did show Miyamoto what they were working on, his reaction was not positive. In 2022, Did You Know Gaming reported they translated a 2003 Nintendo Dream magazine interview, in which Aonuma claimed Miyamoto literally cringed when he saw the new look. Aonuma continued, "Miyamoto had trouble letting go of the realistic Link art style until the very end. At some point he had to give a presentation against his will. That's when he said to me, 'You know, it's not too late to change course and make a realistic Zelda.'" For his part, Miyamoto was much more diplomatic in describing his reaction. In 2002, IGN attended a press junket in Seattle. They reported that Miyamoto told reporters, "When I first saw the cel-shaded Zelda, I was very surprised and excited by it." And while he did not say that he directly disliked the look of the game, he certainly implied it in his 2001 published conversation with Yuji Naka. "I walk away and, well, you can see what they did with Zelda," he said. But as he continued to speak, he did voice support for Aonuma and his team. "Naturally, I have my points of disagreement, but overall, I like the new direction," he said. It wasn't just Miyamoto who initially had a negative reaction to the look of the Wind Waker. Nintendo gave the public a first look at the game in a press conference just ahead of its Space World event in 2001. The trailer runs for less than a minute. It begins with a Moblin bursting through a wooden door. Link stands opposite of it and draws his sword. What follows is a series of gameplay shots. Showing Link battling Moblins in both a forested area and what's perhaps a castle or dungeon. It ends with Link running down a hallway to escape a group of 5 Moblins. He notices something up ahead and leaps from the top of a staircase to grab onto a chandelier. The Moblins slide to a stop, going over the edge of the stairs. They hang in the air for a moment, much like Wile E. Coyote, before falling to the ground below. Link then looks into the camera and winks. There are some cheers heard during the presentation of this trailer, but the reaction on the whole wasn't good. Electronic Gaming Monthly offered a good summary to the reaction in its November 2001 issue. Everyone's jaw dropped, some out of awe, some out of disgust, but all in complete surprise of the radical new look of The Legend of Zelda, reads the header. The article continues. The gathered press in Tokyo and indeed the entire internet was aflame with anxious fans and critics dissecting the cartoony cel-shaded look of Zelda with a passion that makes abortion protesters seem positively laid back. Some notable comments. Anyone over 17 should be ashamed to play a game that looks like that. It may look cool, but it's just not Zelda. And what the hell is Nintendo thinking? I was among the people who did not like the look of the game at first. I never used the term Zelda, but I certainly remember it being tossed around. All I saw were a few blurry still images, usually published right alongside a still from the 2000 demo. And I certainly felt based on those few screenshots that the game did not look good. My opinion on the look of the game changed after I saw video of it in motion, which was likely a year or so after that first reveal. There are still a few people who embraced the new look from the start. Notably among them was Yuji Naka, who was quoted in an EGM article as saying, "The thing I like most about it is that it has a very warm-hearted look, and the animation is superb. I didn't much care for the fact that they changed Link's face, but overall I think it's great. It's very provocative." Those positive reactions were certainly in the minority, however. It is often stated by fans today that the dislike for the look of the game primarily came from outside of Japan, but that does not seem to be true. Speaking to French video gaming site GameCult in 2003, Miyamoto said, "I know that in Europe this design has been strongly criticized, but that was also the case in Japan." As producer, Miyamoto played a large part in the marketing of the game, and due to the negative reaction to the trailer, he decided that it would not be shown any further until players could get hands-on and try it for themselves. Miyamoto told IGN in early 2002, "I don't want to show it off because without playing it, you'll just focus on the graphics." Development of The Wind Waker continued. Link's eyes were one element of the game that underwent significant evolution. Aonuma told IGN in 2002, "We wanted to show the expressions of Link, and the eyes became very important. Gradually, as we managed to program the movement of the eyes, we began to look at different ways we could make use of that. Really, it became more of a natural process in how we could make Link feel alive, and make the player feel that Link was aware of his surroundings." In an Iwata Asks interview from 2013, Aonuma said they'd even toyed with the idea of having beams shoot out of Link's eyes. Design manager Satoru Takizawa said that it was never a serious consideration, but the team did talk about it after Zelda co-creators Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka said the team needed to supply a reason for the eyes being so big. The team also experimented with Link's eyes changing color, such as turning red when Link is engaged in combat. Miyamoto told IGN in 2002, "There were some different opinions on that. One of them, obviously, was that you only see the color of his eyes if you have the camera on him from the front. But even for those who could notice it, we think it felt a little strange, so ultimately, we decided not to do that." In the end, the team settled on having Link look at items of interest in the environment as a hint to the player. When it came to designing the wider world of the game, the team decided to set it on the ocean. In a 2013 Iwata Asks interview, Aonuma said, "We decided rather early on to set the game among the seas. We liked how we could use the open sea in designing the mechanics of the game world. And more than anything, we thought it would be interesting to show the sea in that visual style." The developers say the visuals weren't the only reason they chose the sea as the setting for the game. They also wanted to make the game different from the Nintendo 64 titles. In a 2004 interview published in Nintendo World Report, Aonuma said, "We wanted to introduce a new style of movement, and so what we ended up with was the player moving around in a boat on the ocean traveling between islands. The decision to set the game on the sea and to have Link travel by boat then directly influenced one of the game's biggest mechanics, the use of and control of the wind." Speaking to Electronic Gaming Monthly in 2003, Aonuma said, "We got to talking about how you would travel. Obviously the best option is a sailboat. So that's how we ended up with a game where the wind was blowing constantly through the land to let the player sail around." In the game, wind is depicted as simple white lines which sail through the air, occasionally looping the loop. Aonuma said that the effect was casually developed by a veteran programmer who had created environmental effects for past Zelda games as well. Aonuma said, "I didn't have an image on how the wind should be expressed, so when I saw that programmer making it, I thought, this is it! And I thought if we could use that, it would be even better." In a 2003 interview with Nintendo Dream, Aonuma said the development of the ship started with the creation of the boating course minigame featured in the final game. The developers expanded from there. Aonuma told Nintendo Dream, I've never operated a ship myself, so for the sake of implementing sailing in-game, I read books and such to research. But if the controls were too realistic, it would be difficult to operate with a controller. So I had a hard time figuring out where to draw the line. While Aonuma had never sailed before, there were members of the team who had, and they helped implement some of the realism of the sailing into the game. For example, the ability to tack or sail upwind came from a programmer with sailing experience. I used to think that you couldn't sail into the wind, Aonuma said. Then someone who had actually been on a yacht told me if you sail in a zigzag, you'll be able to sail upwind, which was the first time I'd heard of it. I was told that's something everyone in America learns in high school, so if you don't do it properly, you'll get complaints. And I thought, I can't let this go, can I? He laughed at that. That bit of foresight by that particular programmer paid off, at least in my case. I can personally say that I did try sailing upwind, and figured out how to tack in-game because of something I read in a history book in school. It wasn't something I was taught directly by the teacher. It was just one of those side notes in the book. What historical event it pertained to, I couldn't tell you today. What stuck with me was the concept of sailing upwind, and I specifically tried it in the Wind Waker because of that. While players can sail upwind just as sailors do in the real world, the developers didn't want players to be at the mercy of the wind. Shigeru Miyamoto and Eiji Aonuma spoke to European journalists in 2003. Eurogamer published that interview, but they didn't really specify who was speaking for the most part. In response to a reporter's question, it was said, "We decided to use a ship and to make the use of a sailing boat so that players could have control over the wind. And that is how we came up with the idea of wind control. We were also thinking in terms of the advancement of the technology. Many people focus on beautiful graphics, and we wanted to take advantage of areas that no one else was using, and that was the controlling of the wind by taking advantage of the high performance of Nintendo GameCube. If players are to control the wind, then they need something to control it with. The developers decided to play off a feature from previous 3D Zelda games, and have Link perform spells by playing music. The question was, what instrument should Link use this time? And how would players interact with it? Aonuma's first thought was a theremin. If you don't know, that's an electronic instrument, played not by touching it, but by waving your hands above it. Aonuma told Nintendo Dream, "At the same time we were proposing this project, a movie dealing with the theremin came out. It was something like, that's interesting, I wonder if we can use it. So I started experimenting." It appears some of Miyamoto's biggest suggestions to developers on this project involve these experiments with the theremin. Aonuma said Miyamoto had him rework the system 2 to 3 times. Describing his initial plan to control the instrument, Aonuma said, "At first I tried to make use of both sticks. It's a remnant of the theremin, which is played with both hands." But he said that Miyamoto rejected the initial idea because it was too hard to control. Aonuma reworked it. And as they were reworking the system, the team considered swapping out the theremin for a conductor's baton. "We often replace the initial idea with something else," Aonuma said. "So while we were exploring various things, we ended up saying, wouldn't a baton be good? One of the game's keywords is wind, and we thought that wind and the action of swinging would go well together." Aonuma continued, "I also agonized over which one to keep, baton or theremin. Or maybe mix the two to create something that hadn't existed before. But I couldn't decide. So I made a snap decision to go with the baton, and it became what it is now. With the wind at their control, players are free to sail around the world." Aonuma and his team wanted to ensure that players would be able to explore the world seamlessly, without any loading screens or zones between islands. He said they also experimented with various speeds for the boat. And at one point, he made it much too fast. Writer Mitsuhiro Takano told Nintendo Dream, "It was so fast even the sharks couldn't keep up with it." He laughed. The problem was, the GameCube couldn't keep up either. Aonuma told Nintendo Dream that the entire Great Sea from the water to the islands were tuned to make seamless travel across the world a reality. The reason for the size of the sea is that if we made it smaller, we wouldn't have had time to read the data of an island that you're about to visit, Aonuma said. "We were bargaining for microseconds, so the speed of the ship was balanced for that as well." Most Zelda titles prior to The Wind Waker were developed gameplay first, story second. The Wind Waker's no different. Aonuma said the story grew out of the gameplay and setting that they were developing. Speaking to MTV in 2013, Aonuma said, "We knew we wanted to have the seas as our setting, and we could really bring to life the sea via the toon shading. And because exploration is such a huge part of the experience, for example, we decided Hyrule has to exist somewhere in this expansive sea. Got it, it'll be under the sea. It'll be sunken Hyrule, and partway through your character will have to go diving into the sea and discover it there. This is how the story will progress." So it was a very organic process almost, with the gameplay and the environment and the story all being created as we went. The game is ultimately a sequel to Ocarina of Time, set generations after the events of that game. Legendary Nintendo composer Koji Kondo again returned to work on the music. He was joined by 3 other composers, Kenta Nagata, Hajime Wakai, and Toru Minagishi. As with Majora's Mask, Eiji Aonuma was largely hands-off when it came to the music. He told IGN in 2002, "I let them work on their own. So for me, it's a lot of fun to see how the sound takes shape, and how they're using different effects in battles and such. I'm not quite sure what to make of Kondo's position on the team." Aonuma and others have stated in interviews that the composing team was headed up by Kondo. But he told IGN in 2014, "I wasn't the sound director on Wind Waker. That was done by some other staff members. But I can say that out of all the games that I was not the sound director on, Wind Waker is my favorite." I don't see anyone in the credits with the title of sound director or sound supervisor. I'm not clear who that person was on the Wind Waker. It's perhaps notable that Kondo is listed 4th out of the 4 composers on the credits. The other credits for sound have to do with sound effect programming and sound library programming. The soundtrack notably works in several cues from Ocarina of Time and A Link to the Past. Speaking about the composer team bringing back past compositions into this new game, Aonuma said that it makes sense in terms of the story, and they've implemented it in a way that I think will be appropriate. While Aonuma was largely hands-off with the music, it seems that Shigeru Miyamoto gave the composers some direction. He told IGN in 2002, "I really wanted them to try to create music that the player might get up and dance to. Something to that great of an extent. When you first get in the sailboat, you should really feel more emotion." Aonuma described a moment that proved to him just how important the music was to the game in a 2003 interview with Nintendo Dream. He said, "There was one time I was debugging a bug that caused all the music to skip. I couldn't fix it for an entire day, and I had to debug all day without music. It made me feel sick," he said with a laugh. "At one point, I seriously thought maybe the game was no good," he said, continuing to laugh. "Well, it wasn't quite when we were on the verge of completion, but it was about the time that I had started being serious. So the whole day I was like, I might not be able to do this anymore. But the next day, the music came back all of a sudden, and those dark feelings were blown away. It turned out the music was really important," he said with a laugh. The battle music stands out, as it really emphasized the adaptive soundtrack of the game. Stabs on synth strings were added to the battle music every time Link lands a hit. It's real-time Mickey Mousing. If you're not familiar, that's a term which refers to scores that match the movements of characters on screen, seen in a number of early Disney cartoons. IGN asked if it was done to enhance the cinematic feeling of the game. Miyamoto said it was the opposite. "We actually tried to do something less cinematic," he said. "We wanted to make the music much more interactive with the gameplay. You'll find a very natural flow of the music in the battles. When you hit an enemy, new instruments are added." The original music created for The Wind Waker often has a lively feel to it. There's also some Irish influence on the music, most prominently heard in the main theme. Aonuma told IGN that an Irish harp is among the instruments that were sampled for the soundtrack. Aonuma also revealed an interesting detail about one of the other instruments sampled. He told Nintendo World Report in 2004, "You may recall in the opening to The Wind Waker, in the opening story scroll, it starts off with a mandolin that's played. That's actually sampling taken from Mr. Miyamoto actually playing the mandolin. And it was basically the result of some discussion. that we really needed to have that kind of sound to start things off and to be part of the music. Now, to be clear, in another interview, Aonuma stated that Miyamoto did not play the notes in the order and the rhythm that you hear them on the soundtrack, but he played the individual notes that were recorded as they were creating the sample library used to create the music. After a year of additional development, the public got its second look at the Wind Waker. Nintendo brought a playable demo of the game to E3 in May of 2002. Reaction to this demo was much more positive compared to the negative initial reaction to that first trailer. IGN's Fran Mirabella wrote, "I'm completely over any apprehensions I have about the cell shading. The art design is awesome and it feels very much like Zelda." Based off the description, it sounds like the demo started with a segment from the game's second dungeon, Dragon Roost Cavern. It also featured the boss fight with Goma in that dungeon, and a bit of the first dungeon, the Forsaken Fortress. There was also Outset Island, and the boating course minigame. Mirabella noted that there were some issues with the camera during the boss fight in the demo, but he wrote, "The Legend of Zelda is shaping up to be every bit as good as Ocarina of Time." He, however, thought that Nintendo would not make its planned release at the end of 2002. He was wrong. The Zelda team managed to get the game out in time for the end of the year holidays in Japan. According to Miyamoto, they managed to get the game done in 2.5 years. There is a perception that The Wind Waker is a game that was rushed to market, that it is somehow incomplete, or that it's at least a game where the overall vision was somehow compromised. I don't really agree with those statements based off the interviews that I've read and the game that I've played. Let me walk you through the statements that I believe have led to that perception, the statements that I believe rebut that perception, and my own thinking on the matter. First, let's talk about the development time. The Wind Waker, as I said, was completed in 2.5 years, which is less time spent on Ocarina of Time and A Link to the Past, for example. Both of those games had 3-year development cycles. But it's also worth noting that both those games had initial deadlines of 2 years and were ultimately delayed, resulting in the 3-year development. I did not see any mention of delays in interviews and articles that I read about the Wind Waker. Now let's talk about the rush. It is true that Aonuma stated that they had 4 composers on the game due to the rushed development schedule. The developers also said that they were in a rush towards the finish line. It seems, as with most projects on a deadline, at least in my experience, there was a rush towards the end. Aonuma, an event planner and scriptwriter, Mitsuhiro Takano, described the crunch that happened near the end of development. Takano was putting in so much overtime he slept at Nintendo's offices. He told Nintendo Dream in 2003, "When everyone would arrive in the morning, I would go up from where I slept on the 3rd floor to my work area on the 5th floor. And at midnight, I would return to my life on the 3rd floor. I had no idea what the weather or conditions were like outside." Aonuma said he also lost track of the weather, stating, "I'd be like, what is going on with people wearing the down jackets?" He laughed. "If I returned home, I was surprised to feel how cold it had gotten." Takano then added, "Even though it was so painful, in the end we had finished it and played it endlessly. While playing, I thought, this isn't too bad if I say so myself." He laughed. Despite the intense overtime the team was turning in, they seem much more positive about their experience on the Wind Waker than they do with their experience on Majora's Mask, which was completed in less than half the time and had intense crunch. Aonuma told Nintendo Dream, "Actually, with this project, I was able to have a lot of fun. I don't know if it's because I'm getting older, but going into projects while stressful is always more of a challenge than anything else." So while there is doubtlessly a rush and crunch to complete this game, I'm not sure that it was too much of a different experience that the team had on past titles. The Zelda team members have told stories of crunch from the very beginning. How about the idea that the game is somehow incomplete? I suspect that there are 2 contributors to that perception. One is a 2005 interview with the Swedish magazine Reset. In that interview, Aonuma acknowledged criticism of the game's Triforce quest, and he said, "At the end of the production, we fought against the clock, and there were parts that I was forced to approve even though they didn't feel complete." So wait, isn't that it? Didn't Aonuma just say that he approved things that didn't feel complete? Yeah, he did, but there's a difference between something feeling incomplete and actually being incomplete. The game was finished and put onto store shelves. It wasn't cancelled, it's not unreleased. It tells a full story from beginning to end. It doesn't feature any obvious gaps to my mind. Aonuma has acknowledged criticism he received about the Triforce Quest, and has likewise said that there are things that he wished to change about it, but reconsidering the execution of something is different from saying that thing is unfinished. I also wonder if his thoughts have more to do with the Japanese release of the game compared to other releases overseas. That is, after all, the version of the game that he would be most likely to revisit, even years down the line, since it's the version that's in his native language and would be on shelves in Japan. And while I haven't seen anything from Aonuma that would confirm this thinking of mine, an unrelated interview with Shigeru Miyamoto, I think perhaps gives some credence to this thinking. Speaking to Kotaku in 2013, Miyamoto described Zelda 2 as a game that he was disappointed in. He said that he had issues with the design of Zelda 2, essentially saying that it didn't live up to its potential. But he also cited some technical issues due to the hardware, calling out the game's load times in particular. This might surprise Western players. It certainly did interviewer Stephen Totilo. The cartridge version of the game does not have anything that would really be considered a load time. But in Japan, the game was released on the Famicom disk system, and it did have load times. So even though there are versions out there where the load times are essentially non-existent, that's not what Miyamoto thought of. In terms of the Wind Waker, there are a number of changes documented between the original Japanese release of the game and later releases elsewhere in the world. In a 2003 Eurogamer interview where speakers weren't really specified, it was said, "We have fine-tuned the game balance and controls of the Wind Waker for the European and US markets, and that is the result of getting comments from users in Japan." According to ZeldaSpeedruns.com, several items were shuffled around, including heart pieces and rupees, to make rewards for completing certain tasks seem more fair and worth it. For example, in the Japanese version, the reward for completing the Savage Labyrinth is 10 rupees. In other versions, it's a heart piece. They also made adjustments to the Triforce Quest. In the Japanese version, one shard is acquired by players first finding a treasure chart, which leads to another treasure chart, which leads to a third treasure chart, which leads to a Triforce chart, which, after it's deciphered, will lead to the shard. That was removed for other versions. The Triforce chart is now found directly from the pirate ship near Needle Rock Island. Likewise, the Incredible chart was added to versions outside of Japan. This makes the Triforce quest much quicker and easier to complete. The Zelda team already made improvements to the game, including the Triforce quest. I suspect that when a couple of years after release, Aonuma described the quest as slow and said it didn't feel complete, he may have been thinking of the original version. I can't say for sure, that's just my suspicion, and you can decide for yourself what you believe. Now, what I can hear someone saying is, but they cut 2 dungeons from the game, it can't be complete. And yes, they did cut 2 dungeons from the game. Many people claim it's because of the development schedule, but I think those claims should be taken with a big grain of salt, and here's why. The public found out about the 2 cut dungeons from Shigeru Miyamoto. In 2 interviews, he stated that 2 dungeons were cut. One is the 2003 interview published in Eurogamer. The speaker was not specified, but through context clues we can pick up that it was Miyamoto. The second was in a 2003 interview with Superplay magazine. In both interviews, Miyamoto said that dungeons were cut because they didn't have time to implement them. Here's the thing. Aonuma was not present for that Superplay interview, but he was there for the Eurogame interview, and he corrected Miyamoto during that interview. It's the only time in the entire interview when a speaker is specified. He said, "We really didn't leave anything out when we completed the Wind Waker. And of those things which I had, which we could not incorporate into the Wind Waker, we already incorporated them into our next projects." In a 2003 interview with Electronic Gaming Monthly just a couple months later, Aonuma was asked about the cut dungeons. And he said, "The reason we ended up pulling those is because as we were looking at the overall scale of the adventure, it had gotten really big. At that point, we thought it had gotten too big for all ages to play. And that was the idea. We wanted anyone, kids to adults, experts to new gamers, to be able to play through the game to completion." Those are the only times I can find where Aonuma talked about the cut dungeons at the time of release. He did, however, talk more about difficulty and designing the game so that anyone can complete it. He told Nintendo Dream in 2003, "This time, we've aimed to create an experience that allows players to be able to see and play with all of the ideas to their fullest. With Ocarina of Time, I received a lot of feedback from players who said they felt stuck due to the dungeons. But I wanted people to experience the game till the end. I would say that we have carefully adjusted the difficulty in The Wind Waker so that anyone can complete it." All that said, there is obviously a contradiction between Miyamoto and Aonuma. Whose words do we take over whose? For me, that answer is Aonuma. That's because based on all I read and looked through, Miyamoto's involvement in The Wind Waker was minimal. He was front and center in the marketing efforts because that's his job as a producer. But Aonuma and Miyamoto were clear in the interviews that Miyamoto did not design any specs. And for that reason, I would take Aonuma's statements that nothing was left out and that the dungeons were cut for reasons other than time at face value. I will also add that it shouldn't come as a surprise that there is content that was considered for The Wind Waker but did not make it into the final game. That's true of all Zelda titles. It's likely true of all video games. That's also true of movies, of books, and other creative endeavors. Projects evolve and change as development proceeds. In a 2003 interview with Computer and Video Games magazine, Aonuma was asked if The Wind Waker matched his original vision for the project. He replied, "I am not an artist. Granted, I do have an image of how the game will look in the end. But what I normally try to do is convey the look and the feel of the game to the artists, lots of minor details. The artists then take those words and create something on screen for me. I'm very grateful that I have the staff that I do, because they usually come up with something more beautiful and elaborate than I could have imagined. Going into The Wind Waker, I had an image that they were able to create and more." The Wind Waker hit store shelves in North America in March 2003. And it was released in PAL regions in May. In North America, Nintendo ran its most successful pre-order campaign in the company's history to that point. IGN reported in March 2003 that Nintendo received 560,000 pre-orders for the game. The record number was likely due to the fact that as a bonus for pre-ordering, Nintendo gave out copies of a GameCube port of Ocarina of Time, bundled with the previously unreleased Ocarina of Time Master Quest. I was among the people who pre-ordered the game. In fact, it was the first of 6 games that I've ever pre-ordered in my life. The bonus copy of Ocarina of Time is what drove me to pre-order. Otherwise, I likely would have just bought the game during the launch window. The Wind Waker was a sales success. It sold more than 4.4 million copies. That's according to multiple sources, including VG Charts, VGSales.fandom wiki, and the installbaseforum.com. According to both the Install Base forum and a separate list compiled by the editors at Wikipedia, The Wind Waker is the 4th best-selling GameCube title. In terms of the series as a whole, it outsold Zelda 2, Majora's Mask, both Oracle titles, and Four Swords. It also outsold both versions of Link's Awakening if we count them individually, but it did not match the combined sales of both versions of that title. And yet, in any discussion of The Wind Waker, it seems to be chalked up as a sales disappointment. This seems to be because of statements made in 2007 by Eiji Aonuma. I feel like these statements are not given quite the proper context. Aonuma gives very few numbers. He says nothing about what Nintendo's sales projections of the game were, nothing about the budget, or how profitable it was, or anything that would truly give us an idea if The Wind Waker was a sales disappointment for Nintendo, as commentators frame it. What he does say is that immediately following the release of The Wind Waker, Aonuma and a few members of the Zelda team started initial work on what they called The Wind Waker 2. He says by the time of E3 2003, The Wind Waker had sold 1 million copies in North America, but sales in Japan had not hit that point yet. E3 was held in mid-May that year, meaning that The Wind Waker had moved 1 million copies in just a couple of months. But he also says that sales measurably slowed in North America following the first 1 million sold. He attributed the slower sales in Japan to something that Nintendo referred to as gamer drift, basically a downturn in the Japanese video game market. People just weren't buying or engaging with as many video games as they had in the past. Aonuma talked about Nintendo's strategy for dealing with gamer drift. It was to create unique, new, engaging ways to play. That included utilizing Game Boy connectivity features on GameCube and the creation and launch of the Nintendo DS in 2004 and the Wii in 2006. Aonuma said he spoke to Nintendo of America employees about why sales had slowed in North America. Whoever he talked to attributed it to the cel-shaded graphics of the Wind Waker, saying there was a perception that the game was for younger kids. So Aonuma decided in 2003, before the game had completed its first year of sales, to pivot away from the cel-shaded look for the Wind Waker 2 project, resulting in the creation of Twilight Princess. So, can we really say that the Wind Waker was a sales disappointment based on those statements? I personally don't think so, especially considering the final numbers for the game. But I also can't say what Nintendo's projections for the games were. I think what we can say for sure is that Aonuma changed the direction of one Zelda project early on in its development based on a game industry downturn in Japan and a measured slowing of sales in North America before the first year of sales was even complete. I can also say that according to articles published in March of 2004 in both the MagicBox.com and RPGamer.com, that the Wind Waker had reached 3 million sales by the end of its first full year on the market worldwide. Sales slowed after that, with an additional 1.4 million plus copies being sold in the remaining 2 years of the GameCube's life. Most people seem to compare the sales of the Wind Waker to Ocarina of Time in order to explain how it could possibly be considered a sales disappointment. This honestly doesn't make sense to me. Ocarina of Time was the best-selling game of the series at the time, which really makes it an outlier. The Wind Waker sold in line with the majority of titles in the series. I found nothing indicating that Nintendo itself had projected it to match or exceed the sales of Ocarina of Time. I guess I wouldn't put it past a corporate bean counter to do so, but it really seems unwise to set a sales goal that exceeded all other entries in this series. Especially when you've already released other games in the series since then, and none of them matched the sales of Ocarina of Time either. I'll close off all the talk of sales with this. In a 2016 interview, Miyamoto talked sales numbers with Forbes. He outlined what kind of sales they would need to see from Breath of the Wild for it to be considered a success. He said, "Breath of the Wild has over 100 staff and over 300 people in the credits, spending over 5 years. Our current efforts will be helpful in the next production. The costs will be recovered by selling large volumes, passing 2 million sales. A game is a hit in the domestic market if it reached 300,000 sales. But we're targeting worldwide sales. So, Breath of the Wild would be considered a hit at Nintendo if it sold more than 2 million copies. It had double the staff, double the production time of the Wind Waker. I just really can't think that Nintendo wanted more sales to achieve success and profitability with the Wind Waker than they wanted with Breath of the Wild. I think we can say it's a success, despite Aonuma's initial concerns about the sales." There is a concept that for many years was a regular subject in online forums dedicated to The Legend of Zelda, the so-called Zelda Cycle. This is an idea that a new Zelda release will receive a negative reaction from fans at first, but over time those fans will reassess their feelings and grow more positive about the game. In a 2013 Iwata Asks interview, Aonuma and other members of the Zelda team said that they felt the Zelda cycle was in play when it came to the Wind Waker. While the Wind Waker's cel-shaded, anime-inspired art received much criticism at the time of its reveal, appreciation for its looks have only grown over time. In 2013, the Wind Waker received an HD remaster for the Wii U. Aonuma noted that fan response to the announcement of that remaster was incredibly positive. In an Iwata Asks interview, the developers noted that the idea for the HD remaster came from early experiments on the Wii U as the early stages of what would become Breath of the Wild were just getting underway. Design manager Satoru Takizawa said they took different Link models, one from the Twilight Princess-inspired tech demo for Wii U, one model from Skyward Sword, and one from the Wind Waker. They put them on the Wii U, and they applied lighting effects to them. He said, "It made the Wind Waker Link really stand out." "We thought it was amazing," said Takizawa. "So we set up the sea and the islands from the Wind Waker, and we put them on Wii U, and we adjusted the images. That resulted in great images with vibrant sunlight and superb contrast. After Aonuma saw these experiments, he emailed Takizawa and he asked how long it would take to pull off a remastering of the Wind Waker on Wii U. The team behind the experiments said it could be done in less than a year. So Aonuma went to Miyamoto and got the project greenlit. The team gave the game's lighting an overhaul. They touched up some of the graphics, but HD Refining Program Director Takuhiro Dota and others on the project described the visuals of the original as being over-designed. Dota said, "It felt to me that what they were originally trying to do with the Wind Waker didn't fit within the confines of SD resolution. By changing it to HD, I saw the number of colors increased, the resolution go up, and the animation become finer and fluid, so the character's eye movement and things like that come alive." In that same interview, Takizawa said, "When it comes to the animation, we hardly corrected it at all. But that's because we think the original was the most visually pleasant of the Legend of Zelda games." What did get changed were a number of gameplay elements. Wind Waker HD director Daiki Iwamoto was not part of the original Wind Waker team. He said in an interview that he bought a copy of the Wind Waker when it first released and he played it. He said that there were some elements that bothered him. "My viewpoint was entirely that of a player," he said, "and as I played, I noticed places that made me think, that's not quite right, and if they had just done this, it would have been better." The Wind Waker HD received additional revisions to the Triforce Collection quest, beyond those done in the original release outside of Japan. It was further streamlined with some elements made harder to miss, and with most of the shards now appearing in place of the original Triforce charts. Link's movement was also made smoother, and he was given a wider range of movement. Link can now walk when in first-person mode, and he can turn while moving and swinging on a rope instead of having to stop. An optional Swift Cell item was also added, which increases Link's sailing speed, while ensuring the wind is always at Link's back when activated. The increased power of the Wii U allowed these additions to be implemented. There are also a number of other smaller tweaks made throughout the game. The Wind Waker HD released in North America and Japan in September 2013. It hit PAL regions in October of that year. According to the Install Base forum, it sold more than 2.3 million copies, making it the 9th best-selling game on Wii U. For my playthrough on this podcast, I played through both versions of the game. On GameCube, I'm playing through the first quest, much of it with my wife. You'll hear from her in some of the episodes. On Wii U, I played through the second quest. I tackled much less side content in the Wii U version, but I hope to highlight a few of the changes between the versions. If you want to follow along, please subscribe. If you've already subscribed, thank you. And thanks for listening to this episode all the way to the end. You are awesome. Next week, I'm going to start my playthrough on Outset Island before heading to the Forsaken Fortress. I'm Paul Riley, and I will see you next week.